Recently, I had walked into a small library in Princeton, New Jersey, and to my astonishment, I recognized a man sitting in an armchair as the late Albert Einstein. So it had to have been Einstein's ghost. He seemed very relaxed, so I sat down opposite him in a similar chair and smiled. He returned my smile, which made me think that I could start up an interesting conversation. "Hello, Dr. Einstein. It is funny I ran into this way because I need to speak with you. I believe that I have something you have always been looking for, the proof that gravity and inertia are exactly the same. Not approximate, not equivalent, just exactly the same."
I always knew that inertia and gravity were exactly the same, but I could not prove this exactness, you know. True exactness would mean that the surface of a planet was exactly the same as the floor of an accelerating rocket ship. It was my original concept because the feeling and the sensation a person would have while accelerating at the speed of gravity inside a vehicle would be exactly the same as the feeling and sensation a person will have while standing upon the surface of our planet. But logically, that does not appear to work, because it would also mean that the surface of planets were accelerating upwards into space, like the floor of a spaceship. The diameter of Earth would be getting larger, faster and faster. Therefore, you know this expression, I had to drop back and punt, the Americans say? I had to give up this idea of exactness and go with my second choice, which I called equivalence. Equivalence allowed me to stick with inertia, though just a numerical equivalent of it.
Dr. Einstein, suppose I told you that just about 100 years after you devised the principle of equivalence, I found the proof for exactness. Your first choice had been right. You did not have to settle for equivalence to make space-time curve. Exactness was essentially perfect all along. No punting needed on this one. You were right on the goal line.
Oh my, this is great. I never had complete confidence in equivalence explanation. I can quote you my exact words. This is what I said at the time. Wait, I have here. I am glad I have this to show you. Let's see. The possibility of explaining the numerical equality of inertia and gravitation by the unity of their nature gives to the general theory of relativity, according to my conviction, such superiority over conception of classical mechanics that all the difficulties encountered must be considered small in comparison with this progress. You see? But I would have been happier with the exactness than just the numerical equality. Unfortunately, exactness meant that the planet's surface would be accelerating upwards into space. After thinking about this for some time, I had no reason to suspect that something as profound as exactness could ever be explained. All planets and stars would have to be getting larger at a faster and faster rate.
Dr. Einstein.
You can call me Albert.
Albert, you had derived equivalence in 1912. Do you remember when Hubble found that the universe was expanding?
Yes, I do. That was much later, in 1929. But even if the whole universe is getting larger, taking everything inside along for the ride, that does not explain the acceleration of gravity. The universe would have to be both expanding and accelerating.
This is true. You had passed away in 1955, so you missed this point entirely. In 2004, scientists proved that the universe was both expanding and accelerating in that expansion.
Oh, I wish I had not left before that news was reported. However, it is a step in the right direction, that the universe is both expanding and accelerating. But there are still other questions that need answering in order to prove exactness.
Albert, you were the one who reported that accelerating bodies in space automatically increase in size. This proves that acceleration and absolute size are inexorably linked.
My beautiful E equal mc squared. Mass always increases size with acceleration.
However, when the normal state of affairs is one where the size of the universe is constantly increasing at an accelerated rate, E equals mc squared can no longer be considered a static quantity state, but rather one whereby the physical world is continuously constructed by constantly increasing energy. The energy conservation laws should then be considered dynamic. The universe getting larger means that everything within the universe, including us, is continuously getting larger at an accelerated rate. We can only see the inertial effects we call gravity. We are actually observing our acceleration rate whenever we see objects falling. Please allow me to elaborate. This is the phenomenon called observer invariance. This observer invariance phenomenon is responsible for the deception of the sun appearing to move across the sky instead of us seeing the Earth turning. When our whole world moves in a particular direction, taking us with it, movement becomes invisible.
Yes, this is absolutely true. When you are a member of a frame in motion, you cannot observe yourself moving without an outside source of reference. Yes, go on, please. This is getting very interesting.
Albert, do you remember that your fellow inventor of the theory of special relativity, Henri Poincaré, said these words back in 1897?
Ah, yes. Yes. Poincaré's The Relativity of Space. He was French. I try to speak like him. Suppose that in one night all the dimensions of the universe became 1,000 times larger. The world will remain similar to itself. Only what was formerly a metre long will now measure a kilometre, and what was a millimetre long will become a metre. The bed in which I went to sleep and my body itself will have grown in the same proportion. When I awake in the morning, what will be my feeling in face of such an astonishing transformation? Well, I shall not notice anything at all. The most exact measures will be incapable of revealing anything of the tremendous change, since the yard measures I shall use will have varied in exactly the same proportions as the objects I shall attempt to measure. In reality, the change exists for only those who argue as if space were absolute. If I had argued for a moment as they do, it was only in order to make it clearer that their view implies a contradiction. In reality, it would be better to say that space is relative. Henri Poincaré, The Relativity of Space, 1897.
In 1897, Poincaré explained how observer invariance would work if the entire environment uniformly and symmetrically grew 1,000 times larger.
I should have taken that tip from old Poincaré. I was just a little pup then. Poincaré was a brilliant seasoned scientist and mathematician.
Albert, listen to this. I have a mind experiment for you.
Oh, I love mind experiments.
If you were in an accelerating spaceship and you held out a plumb bob on a string, it would always pull taut in the direction away from acceleration.
Yes, of course, this is elementary physics of accelerating bodies in space.
But Albert, suppose you had been born on the spaceship, and the spaceship had no windows. Therefore, the ship provided no outside reference to observe. You would have no idea that you were accelerating. But if one day you dropped a ball inside the ship, it would appear to accelerate to the floor. You could even measure this acceleration.
Yes, because the ball stops accelerating and continues at the velocity it had achieved at the time of release. It is the spacecraft, along with the observer, that continues to accelerate through space. What you are really seeing and measuring is the relative difference in motion between the two. I can appreciate that it is rather easy for relative motion to deceive the observer.
That is precisely my point. Someone born into an accelerating frame may have no way of actually telling that they are members of an accelerating frame. They would think that the ball was actually accelerating and the floor of the spaceship was somehow magnetic.
Jeez, this is true. Just as Isaac Newton thought that gravity was somehow a magnetic attraction. So what you are saying is that no one on planet Earth since the beginning of time could ascertain that we are all members of an accelerating frame where the ground is moving upwards. It is totally invisible to us, and it always has been. What an interesting concept. This indeed is beginning to explain how exactness works. If this is true, do you understand the magnitude and the implications this will have on the scientific community?
Albert, it means that some basic laws in physics will become simpler. We can now eliminate the separate laws for gravity, and we can replace them with the universal properties of acceleration. However, the dynamics of reality become somewhat more complex, as every object now has an additional direction of motion that no one had ever dreamed of. It means that the laws of accelerating bodies in space are universal, no matter where in the universe you apply them. Gravity is merely the inertial reaction to an accelerating, inflating universe. All objects behave just like accelerating bodies in space. When you hold up a plumb bob, it always points in the direction away from acceleration. That means that the plumb bob is telling you that when you are standing anywhere on the surface of the Earth, that the ground is accelerating upwards, even though you cannot see the ground moving. This simple device tells us the direction of acceleration and has been doing that all throughout history. We just did not know how to interpret it. The universal properties of acceleration are the complete set of properties of accelerating bodies in space, and they contain all the necessary information to explain gravity. They tell the complete story.
Please explain more. You have my complete attention.
Gravity is actually caused by a dual system of invisible accelerating frames that have formulated because... Albert, you will have to excuse me. I am late. It was nice speaking with you. You can find the mechanics and the entire set of answers to gravity in my book, The Universal Properties of Acceleration.